Seminary, as well as a Doctor of Divinity from Dallas Baptist University, also resident scholar for ethics at Baylor Scott and White Health, as well as senior fellow with the 21st Century Wilberforce Initiative and senior fellow for global studies at Dallas Baptist University's Institute for Global Engagement, author of a number of books, including the latest one called Blessed, and we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes as well. Jim Denison, Dr. Jim Denison, always great to have you in studio.
Kerby, so glad to be back with you today. Thank you for the privilege, my friend.
Okay, we're going to go back to a couple of days ago when you wrote about Rashida Tlaib, and also, of course, we can talk about Ilhan Omar, and these are individuals that are Muslim. And you start the column by actually saying that you wish, this is the article you could have written about the daughter of Palestinian immigrants, shining light of significance on the Palestinian people. But as you pointed out, this is a difficult article for you to write because that's not the real story, is it?
No, it's not. Unfortunately, it's not. I've been to Israel 30 times over the years. I love being in Israel, love being in the Holy Land, love being with the Palestinian people as well. They're some of the most welcoming, warm, gracious, hospitable people that I've ever known and ever been around. So I was really pleased to see that a Palestinian descent, herself not, but her parents, Palestinian immigrants, had been elected to Congress and was going to be going back to the West Bank to visit her elderly grandmother. I could see this as an example to the Palestinians of how hard work. She is herself an attorney and has been very successful in her career, how all of that can really point to a brighter future, to a better future. I was really hoping that's what this story would turn into. Of course, as we know, that is not at all how the story has gone. It's been a very different and a very difficult story as regards anti-Semitism in the United States, anti-Semitism around the world. The way that the various press outlets have reported this and responded to this are illustrative, I'm afraid, of this anti-Semitic trend and trajectory that we're seeing today. And it's really a devastating story.
And well, it certainly is because, again, she has made some comments critical of Israel. And as we pointed out yesterday when I quoted a little bit from Dennis Prager, criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitism. Criticism of the right of Israel or Jews to live in the land, well, that's a little different story. So she's allowed to be critical. We across the table have been critical of some of the things Israel has done. But it goes much further if for no other reason than she has actually worked with a group called MIFTA. And you give us some background in that, which I think, again, this is one of the reasons we do point of view. Sometimes the mainstream press either doesn't understand the issue or they ignore the issue, and you actually delve into a very difficult issue, don't you?
That's really the backstory behind all of this. So as you know, there was a congressional delegation that went to Israel recently. That happens fairly often. They'll go over and they'll meet with the government. They'll talk to the prime minister. They'll look at some of the economic partnerships and issues involved in that. Well, she and the other representative, Ilhan Omar, chose to make their own trip, just the two of them. They were sponsored by this group called MIFTA, which the New York Times, Washington Post reported as a pro-Palestinian kind of economic development group. Well, David French and the National Review and others demonstrated that it's anything but that it's led by a group of people that are virulently anti-Semitic. They have celebrated a woman who helped massacre 13 Israeli children back in 1978. Mm-hmm. They've been part of the blood libel kind of scandalous idea that Jews have historically drunk the blood of their enemies, of Gentiles. They've been anti-Zionist in the extreme. They have wanted the absolute destruction of the nation of Israel. And that's the group that was sponsoring her trip into Israel. She herself has been part of the BDS movement, the boycotts, divestment, and sanctions movement that's seeking to penalize Israel as a nation.
Right.
And so it's in Israeli law that they have the right to forbid a person to come to the country who is detrimental to the national interest, as would be the case of any country, I would think. And so when she wanted to come under those circumstances, that's when the prime minister chose not to allow her to come. He then changed and said, no, she's able to come if she's to see her grandmother and to visit the country if she will not make defamatory statements against the people of Israel. She chose to agree to those conditions. She actually, in writing on letterhead, congressional letterhead, agreed to the conditions set forth that she would not criticize Israel on her trip. She then changed her mind, went back on what she had agreed to do, and then made herself to be a martyr, as it were, for not being allowed to come into the country to visit her grandmother, when really the backstory was so much more complex than that.
It certainly is. And I think it's important to illustrate a couple of points. First of all, one of the reasons why I encourage people to read the daily article, which is must read every single day, you've heard me say that on many occasions, is that you get the rest of that story. And to be fair, I did send to you, and I think you saw there was an article that was posted about the fact that one of the columnists with the New York Times when he was on CNN was kind of critical, and that's a nice phrase. He actually said it was a scandal that most of the press did not cover the story the way you covered the story. Now, you're not mentioned in there directly, but the implication is if we all covered the story the way you and I would cover it, we wouldn't have the, if you will, journalistic scandal. So this is part of the reason why I encourage people to read widely. And if nothing else, one of the reasons why I've posted this article on the Daily article, because it is important to recognize that the media has not treated you well and have not treated this story well and not educated you about all the facts. And so when you just see her crying or you see her at the press conference, it looks like Donald Trump and Netanyahu and others have actually done a great disservice to a woman who simply wanted to visit her grandmother, right?
That's really the backstory. And as you know so well, Kerby, and you've talked about this over the years, these days we're in a day when the press in particular and media in general always have agendas.
Yes.
There was a day. I remember the Walter Cronkite era. My wife and I happened last night to watch a rerun of the movie 13 Days. It was about the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Right.
And they would occasionally drop in clips from Walter Cronkite reporting on that horrific crisis back in the day and how close we actually were. Well, in those days, news made a living by being objective and by being fair, and that's how they got sponsors. That's how they got advertising. And you went to a news source based on who you thought you could trust the most. Walter Cronkite was America's most trusted man and all of that. Well, as you know, in this 24/7 news cycle, we're now at a place where the various platforms and media all know the specific demographic they're trying to reach. Their advertisers know the demographic they're trying to reach, so there's a particular agenda behind everything they're reporting, whether it's to the left or it's to the right. Fox knows who their sponsors are and who their audience is. MSNBC knows who theirs is. CNN knows who theirs is. And so almost every kind of reporting that's theoretically objective isn't.
Yes.
It's all driven by a completely different agenda. And part of the reason that's important for our listeners is as they're looking through a biblical lens at what we're seeing out here, it shows us the larger agenda that's influencing the culture. The New York Times is probably the most influential newspaper in America. And when it takes such an anti-Semitic position on something like this, it makes us understand that's where the culture is going on several levels, not just on a journalistic level. And that kind of understanding of the larger agenda at work equips us to engage the culture more effectively.
And I might just mention a little bit later, after you go, I'm going to be quoting from Cal Thomas, who says, you may not like the New York Times, but it still sets the agenda. And if that agenda is incorrect, we've got a difficulty. So when we come back from the break, I want to talk about another aspect of a very well-written article that you published, and that is the rise of anti-Semitism. Why is that taking place? I think there are political as well as spiritual reasons for that. We'll talk about that with Jim Denison right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Earlier this year, conservative activist Scott Presler sent out a call to action asking people to join him in cleaning up trash in Baltimore. More than 170 volunteers worked from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. picking up over 12 tons of trash. You would think that picking up trash would not lead to the local paper trashing your efforts. You would be wrong. The editorial board of the Baltimore Sun ran an op-ed that trashed Presler and his group. First, they made this snarky comment. They said, "We assumed that it was pure motives that led a Trump supporter to lead a cleanup in Cummings district, right?" Scott Presler even said that this wasn't a political action. He and others saw the need and decided to do something about it. Now, let's be honest. There were probably some mixed motives, but if your only motive was to embarrass a member of Congress, you could do that by calling the media together, pick up some trash in one street, and then go home. More than 100 people worked 12 hours picking up 12 tons of trash. These volunteers were motivated, but they probably won't be motivated to do something like this next time. Back when I was the president of our high school service organization, we spent a day picking up trash and cleaning up a town. The local paper ran a small story about it. If the writer criticized us like the Baltimore Sun, I doubt I would have been able to get anyone to volunteer for the next service project. Oh, and the editors weren't finished. They also complained that the cleanup reinforces the tired image of our failing urban cores, that poor people in this dilapidated city can't take care of their own neighborhoods. What a contrast to a few of the posted videos that showed people in this neighborhood who were appreciative of what was done. Sadly, in this politicized society, no good work goes unpunished. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Affirm Films and the Kendrick Brothers, Overcomer, starring Alex Kendrick and Priscilla Shire, rated PG, in theaters this Friday. Overcomermovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again for a few more minutes with Dr. Jim Denison. Let me just mention that we have a link to the DenisonForum.org. We also have a link to this particular article, so you can find both. But even today, your article about Alyssa Milano is there. Also, as you go to DenisonForum.org, the first thing that pops up is about your new book, Blessed, and that's based on the Beatitudes, which we'll get to in just a few minutes. So if people would like the book, if people would like to subscribe to the daily article, if they would like to get all the other books, I've got a selection of Jim Denison books here, some of which written by you, and some written by you and your son, who we've had on the program and need to have him on again. He brings a lot to the table, as well as volumes 1, 2, and 3 on biblical insight to tough questions. They're just a lot of resources, so take the time to go to the Denison Forum. But most importantly, if they sign up and get the daily article, it comes to the inbox every single day, right?
It does, 5 days a week. I get up at 4:30 in the morning and either revise something I wrote the previous day or sometimes start over, depending on what's happened in the news. And then we have an early morning editor that gets up with me as well, and we try to get it out the door by 6 or so. It's turned into a podcast as well that I would mention. I was recording that myself, but we have a professional voice now, like yourself, that does that and does it so much better than I was doing it. So our listeners can subscribe to the podcast. They can subscribe to the email. It's all free, of course. Everything we do is available at no cost, unless there's a print involved. We have to sell the book because there's printing involved. But if it's a digital resource, we give all that away. We're a donor-based ministry. And anyone that wishes is welcome to subscribe. We'd love for them to do that. We had, as of yesterday, 171,000 subscribers in 203 countries. And last month, we had 650,000 total in our audience between email and social media and YouTube and all the other things we do.
171, because I got 160 there, so I'm going to update that one. And I did mention one son. Let's mention the other son. If you want to read through the Bible and get devotions, your other son is writing on that issue as well, isn't he?
Thank you. Craig Denison is the author of First 15. It's a 15-minute encounter with God. It starts with a worship video, then it goes to a devotional, and then it goes to guided prayer. Craig is himself a musician, a professional musician, a worship leader, as well as an author, and also the strategic leader of our ministry. He's just remarkably gifted. He has a wonderful mother, obviously. And so
He's also an author.
He is an author as well. In fact, she's right now writing a children's Advent guide for this year. She's at home today doing that. So if we would go to first15.org, first15.org, that's where our listeners could find First 15. I do it every day. Have been doing it for years since Craig first developed it. There's an app available. There's a podcast version as well, and first15.org is how they get there.
And again, we have a link to Denison Forum, and that should get you to most of the other places, and it's on our website. And let's get to the other part of this article, and that is the issue of anti-Semitism. You know, I've written on this, and one of the things I thought was so interesting is you document the same thing we do in our booklet. In our booklet, I talk about the fact that there was a survey of 6,000 Jewish people in 8 nations in Europe, and they found that some in a number of different countries like France and Hungary and others, almost half of them that were Jewish thought about immigrating and leaving the country that they are in, the country maybe they were born in, because of anti-Semitism. Here you point out that even apart from some of these on the continent, here a number of Jews who moved from the United Kingdom to Israel because of rising anti-Semitism at home. A new report says anti-Semitic incidents in Britain have spiked to the highest levels. You don't think of anti-Semitism in England, but that's exactly what's taken place, isn't it?
It is. And across the continent, the number of anti-Semitic incidents in France is up 70%. We're seeing it across Europe, and it's really kind of on three levels. On one level, there is this continuing narrative that says Israel ought not exist as a nation.
Mm-hmm.
The claim is that they've stolen the land from the Palestinians, that they're occupiers, that it's apartheid at best. That's what the BDS movement is all about. You're seeing that in Europe in the universities. You're seeing it in their parliaments. You're seeing that as kind of a rising narrative in Europe to begin with. Then on a second level, there's a resentment against the prosperity and the social success that so many Jewish people have had over the years and over the centuries. There are people of the book. There are people of enormous literacy. I think I quoted here that in America, at least in one of the articles, Jewish population's never been more than 2%, but they're 37% of our Nobel laureates. And so with the success that the Jewish people have historically had in industry and in commerce, there's been a growing frustration and animosity, I think, about all of that. Then a third rise is a rise of kind of white nationalism that we're seeing in Europe, and the belief that anybody that isn't white is therefore second class, that they're on some level replacing us, that they're trying to drive us out of our homeland. And so you're seeing a growing kind of prejudice against the Jewish people that's happening here as well as over there.
And one of the things I pointed out to you, and this is one of these articles that was very interesting, is it used to be in Europe, especially in Nazi Germany, that Jewish people had to wear a yellow Star of David. Well, nothing like that has happened, but now in the European Union, many of these countries now are identifying any product that comes from Israel. And that gets us back to the BDS issue as well. And that is, we're going to do what we can to economically punish Jewish people in Israel. And that's something that is something new. And I think this is probably the first time I've talked about it here on Point of View.
I had not seen it until you pointed it out to me. And they're wanting these products to be labeled as coming from Israeli colonies. And the argument they're making, of course, is that this isn't Israeli land, that they're colonists, that they're people that don't deserve to be where it is they are. Well, one of the points people miss in this BDS movement and in this sort of kind of labeling and this kind of economic sort of deprivation is a great deal of the Palestinian economy depends on exports that come out of Israel.
Sure.
When people are wanting to divest themselves of Israeli products, they're really hurting, in many cases, Palestinians more than they are Israelis. I remember a few years ago, there was an actress who was being paid to be a celebrity spokesperson for a particular kind of soft drink and water that was coming from Israel. And so a boycott was, there was a huge outcry. It was Scarlett Johansson, as I recall, a huge outcry against her and against this celebrity sort of endorsement product. And so they got that banned, they got the product banned. But what they didn't know is that 90% of the workforce behind that was Palestinian. So the very
sad.
People they think they're helping, they're actually hurting with so much of this effort.
How do we think about this biblically? You know, we understand that God chose the Jewish people. They're God's chosen people. We have, as you quote here, the quote in Isaiah 43, "You are precious in my eyes and honored, and I loved you." It seems to me that if we are Bible-believing Christians, we should uphold and honor Jewish people and speak out against anti-Semitism. True?
I think we're required to do that. Scripture says that we are to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, as you know, and that's an imperative. Now, that doesn't mean, as you've said, that we don't criticize some things that the Israeli government is doing, as would be the case in any government. I can tell you, having been to Israel 30 times, the Jews are very critical of their government. They're more than willing to criticize what the parliament is doing or the prime minister is doing. There's all sorts of positions on what to do about the West Bank or Hamas or Hezbollah or what they ought to be doing on all these levels. That's criticizing politics. That's criticizing a governmental decision. That's not criticizing people as a people. That's not criticizing Zionism, which is the Jews' right to have a nation, to have their historic nation, to have the nation that was promised them by God. We're required by Scripture to pray for, to love, to reach out to share the gospel with, to do all we can to help the Jewish people know the Messiah as we do.
That's incredible. One of the things you do is go to Israel, and that comes back to your book, Blessed, because, you know, you've actually been to the site, which most people believe, and I think reasonably can be assumed to be the Sermon on the Mount, the location there. You actually give a sermon when you're there, don't you?
I do. In fact, it's kind of fun when I do this. We'll take these groups. Obviously, we'll be there at the Hill of Beatitudes, and sometimes I'll start by saying, I'm about to preach the greatest sermon you've ever heard. The most important sermon you've ever heard. I know there are great preachers, a history of great preachers. I know that sounds egotistical for me to say that, but what I'm about to deliver to you is the greatest sermon in all of Christian history. And then I preach the Sermon on the Mount.
Yes.
Which, of course, is that.
Yes.
and of course foundational to everything else that we do. So the book, Blessed, picks up the Beatitudes as values for culture-changing Christians.
Mm-hmm.
If we're going to be salt and light Christians, then it's critical that we be poor in spirit, which means that we know how much we need God. We be dependent on God because we can't convict people of sin. We can't save souls. We can't change lives. So if we live by that Beatitude, God can use us to change culture. That's how we look at each of the Beatitudes as a foundation for a movement of culture-changing Christians.
So again, it takes you through the Beatitudes, the first part of the Sermon on the Mount, and so that's one of the books available. How Does God See America, that you have written with your son. 7 critical issues, and of course we mentioned quite a number of other books that are available, and it's all at the Denison Forum. And just one more time, as people go to the website, you encourage them to sign up to get the daily article, but mention all the other great resources you have there.
Thank
again.
you so much. So that we have content that's specific to the website that I've written, that others have written as well. It's a kind of a collaborative effort so that we have the ability to help people think biblically about cultural issues on an ongoing basis. And then we have all sorts of social media feeds that people are willing or we'd like to follow. I write 3 tweets a day based on news events that I find through the day that I try to provide a brief kind of commentary and scriptural reference for. So we have 90,000, I think, on our Twitter feed now that are following all of that. We do a great deal of video. We have podcasts for a variety of different sources, plus what I do. And then there are links from there to Christian Parenting, which is a website my wife created, and her writings as well. She has her own website, jennadenison.org, where you can read her blogs and read her Bible studies and content as well. First 15 as well.
Well, so again, Jim Denison, Dr. Jim Denison, it's always great to have you in studio. Again, go to the denisonforum.org, and let me encourage you as your action item, sign up for the daily article. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Kerby, very much.
We'll take a break. We have a lot more to cover right after this.
Point of View is committed to spreading the truth, oftentimes a truth that those in political power don't like getting heard. But the only way it can be heard is if our teams stand strong together, if you do what you can to support the Point of View Truth Team. It's having an impact, as we heard recently from U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert.
Everywhere I go, I hear people that you have influenced, that Point of View has affected. You have made such a difference, and you rely on people to contribute, and if they don't contribute, then that truth does not get heard.
Help Point of View make a difference. Pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Please do what you can. 1-800-347-5151, or visit online, pointofview.net. Look near the top right for the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team, 800-347-5151, and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join a conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Of course, we've talked about anti-Semitism. And let me just mention, we're offering all sorts of little booklets from time to time, and that one on anti-Semitism is certainly one that you could obtain if you would like to. Of course, the one we are offering right now is based upon the interview we did yesterday on climate change, but perhaps you didn't have a chance to hear the hour that we actually did that at 2 o'clock. And this booklet is free of charge. Glad to send it to you. It relates to some of the material we talked about with one of the guests who actually is very articulate in his ability and very well respected, has had more than 100 peer-reviewed articles published in like Science and Science Magazine, but also wrote the book, The Mythology of Global Warming. So we spent some time talking about that. And if you'd like to at least read the free little booklet that I've put together, which includes some of the same information, it doesn't have his book listed in the additional resources because we just found out about his book. But next time we publish this, we might add that book to it as well so that you can find a couple of books that we have that listed here on how Christians should think about the environment, because we should be concerned about the environment, and that is the case, but then also includes two, and now probably we'll add a third book that has done a very good, if you will, scientific or policy critique, depending on which book you're talking about, of the issue of climate change. Anyway, we've been talking about anti-Semitism, and I thought I'd come back to the other aspect of this, the argument that America is a racist nation from its founding, and that goes to the 619 Project. I talked about it yesterday, but quite possibly you did not hear all of that conversation, so I thought I'd repeat a little of it, if for no other reason than the New York Times has decided to put together a major initiative which is entitled the 1619 Project. What is that? Well, the argument is we don't consider America starting in 1776 with the Declaration of Independence, or even 1789 with the establishment of the nation through the Constitution. We're going to go all the way back to 1619 when the first slave came to Jamestown, and which is, really just reaching in a silly sort of way. If you really want to talk about a permanent colony, let's go to at least 1620 with Plymouth Colony, and there were no slaves there, by the way. But, of course, this is an attempt to rewrite history, although the argument is being made in a much different way. And yesterday I read from Jim Garrity, who was saying this is a major, significant event, if for no other reason than if you look at just the New York Times Magazine, we're talking about 100 pages with a few ads, 10 essays, a photo essay, a collection of original poems, stories, and everything else. And then, of course, I spent some time talking about all the African Americans that are not mentioned in the 1619 Project. So if this is supposed to help us add some good material to, for example, Black History Month, it's doing a really terrible job. For example, the so-called U.S. colored troops that actually fought in the Civil War, 179,000 black men, 10% of the Union Army, they're not mentioned. Buffalo Soldiers, they're not mentioned. The Harlem Hellfighters fighting in World War I, they're not mentioned. Dory Miller's heroism at Pearl Harbor, not mentioned. The Tuskegee Airmen, they're not mentioned, but the treatment of the Tuskegee men, Tuskegee, I should say, men, is mentioned. Frederick Douglass is mentioned twice. Harriet Tubman is never mentioned. Booker T. Washington is never mentioned. You can just go down the list. It's pretty embarrassing, actually, if this is supposed to be any kind of historical analysis. But I thought for just another minute or two, I would quote today from Cal Thomas. He's been on the program with us many times before. And he points out that the newspaper's executive editor recently called a staff meeting to announce the 1619 Project, named, as he said, for the first year that the first African slaves were brought to Virginia. Someone recorded the session, leaked it to Slate, which published a transcript. And that's why you have had some very interesting articles in places like the Washington Examiner, because even though the goal is supposedly to reframe American history, Cal Thomas says more like rewrite it. This is the stuff of totalitarian regimes, he says, where the media serve as a propaganda organ for the state, in this case, the surging left wing of the Democrat Party. And so he takes you through some of the history of it, which I won't bother with right now, but then takes you to one of the articles by Byron York, who says the basic thrust of the 1619 Project is that everything in American history is explained by slavery and race. This message is woven throughout the first publication of the project, an entire edition of the New York Times Magazine. And again, he writes about this in the Washington Examiner. If you want to get a feel for that, Cal Thomas says, here's just one excerpt that will give you a little bit of an idea. And this is a direct quote from, again, the 1619 Project, in which it says, quote, "If you want to understand the brutality of American capitalism, you have to start on the plantation," unquote. I love Cal Thomas. He says, never mind that brutal capitalism, in quotes, has lifted more boats than any other economic system. And so if you start with the assumption that capitalism is wrong, and it's due to the fact that it is based upon such things as, slavery, then you can kind of see the direction in which the 1619 Project is directed. And a lot of this has to do with slavery, which caused Larry Elder, who's been on our program. He's a broadcaster, African-American himself, and he tells the story, interestingly enough, of somebody that he's known since grade school, who I assume, since Larry's black, his friend was black. That's the implication from this. He didn't necessarily say that, but as a matter of fact, he says he argued Africans were taken out of the continent and all those kinds of things. So anyway, his friend was going to change his name to an Arabic one, and you've seen that happen before. So then Larry Elder starts taking him through a couple of quotes, and one of those is from a book called Prisons and Slavery, in which the writer writes that the Arabs' treatment of black Africans can aptly be considered an African Holocaust. Arabs killed more Africans in transit, especially when crossing the Sahara Desert, than Europeans and Americans, and even more centuries, both before and after the years of the African slave trade. Arab Muslims began extracting millions of black African slaves centuries before Christian nations did. Arab slave traders removed slaves from Africa for about 13 centuries compared to 3 centuries of the African slave trade, and talks about how most of these individuals, when they were taken into the Ottoman Empire, into the sub-Sahara salt mines, died usually within 5 years or less. So, of course, his name-changing friend said, yeah, but this guy, he's probably white and he's European, so why should I believe him? So then Larry Elder takes him to Thomas Sowell, who, by the way, has been on the program with us as well, who is an economist and historian and black, who said, of all the tragic facts about the history of slavery, Thomas Sowell says, the most astonishing to an American today is that although slavery was a worldwide institution for thousands of years, nowhere in the world was slavery a controversial issue prior to the 18th century. People of every race and color were enslaved and enslaved others. White people were still being bought and sold as slaves in the Ottoman Empire decades after American blacks were freed. So the point he's making is people always took slavery for granted, didn't ever speak about the evil of slavery. You can look from article after article, century after century, and nothing. So then, Thomas Sowell says, the region of West Africa, which was one of the slave-trading regions of the continent before, during, and after the white man arrived, it was the Africans who enslaved their fellow Africans, selling some of these slaves to Europeans or to Arabs. And then he goes on to give us a little bit of an interesting history there, and then finally points out that, guess what? All of a sudden, in the 18th century, there were groups that began to speak out against slavery for the first time. And to a person, if you go back and look at what was really the foundation of what today we call the abolition movement, they were Christians. And even though it's true that there were Christians in the past that didn't speak about slavery, there were even probably Southern Christians that sometimes tried to justify the Bible for slavery. The remarkable change and the emphasis on what today is called the abolition movement was indeed a Christian movement. We see this, of course, very easily in England, William Wilberforce stands in the British Parliament speaking out against slavery. You have the abolition movement, which was successful and caused a number of people like John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Benjamin Rush, and others to actually try to outlaw slavery in the colonies, but could not do so because, of course, the king had already endorsed slavery. And so that was, for a time, one of the reasons why the Declaration of Independence was written, but had to be removed because of objections from some of the slave owners in South Carolina and Georgia. But when we come back from the break, let me also read a little bit more, because there were a few other things that caused Larry Elder's friend, who was going to change his name, actually decided to change his mind. We'll talk about that right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
After a few more minutes, I was talking earlier about this idea of the 1619 Project, and I just thought I'd read a short piece here from Larry Elder, African-American broadcaster, has been on the program with us before, and he tells the story. It's a fascinating story, which he has recounted in the past, but I thought I'd post it again, of a friend that he had, I assume they're both black, that was convinced that Christianity was a white man's religion that justified slavery. So Larry Elder began to then take him through a couple of key quotes. Primarily, he looked at one of these books called Prisons and Slavery. There are many other books that you could certainly point to, and then takes him through some of the comments being made, interestingly enough, by Thomas Sowell, who, again, is African American. So you can't say, well, he's just, trying to justify the white man's religion. And talks about the fact that really what you had is a very tragic set of circumstances where Africans enslaved their fellow Africans, selling them as slaves to Europeans or to Arabs, some keeping them for themselves. And at the peak of the African slave trade, so says Thomas Sowell, Africans retained more slaves for themselves than they sent to the Western Hemisphere. Arabs were the leading slave raiders in East Africa, ranging over an area larger than all of Europe. Well, you say, okay, that's one African American's perspective. Well, interesting enough, Larry Elder quotes from another individual, and that would be Henry Louis Gates, Jr. Now, he is at Harvard University. He heads up the Department of African and African American Studies. And if that name sounds familiar, he's the one that Barack Obama had beer with. Remember when you had the Cambridge police that actually came and he was trying to get into his house and they weren't sure if he was the homeowner. And so you remember the whole flap that took place there, and there were all sorts of people that were suggesting that this is a good example of where the Cambridge police were really stupid in what they did. Well, anyway, this is the man, okay? This is a friend of Barack Obama. This is the head of the African and African American Studies Department at Harvard University. And here's what Henry Louis Gates Jr. said. He said between 1525 and 1866, in the entire history of the slave trade to the New World, according to the Transatlantic Slave Trade Database, 12 million Africans were shipped to the New World. 10 million survived the dreaded Middle Passage, disembarking in North America, the Caribbean, and South America. How many of these 10 million were shipped directly to North America? Only 388,000. That's right, a tiny percentage. Now, the reason that Larry Elder brought this up was because his friend, who wanted to change his name to an Arabic name because he wanted to reject any kind of Western values, Larry Elder asked him, well, if you're concerned about slavery in America, then you certainly must be concerned about slavery in Brazil. And his friend said, Brazil? Which now brings me back to this quote, because here Henry Louis Gates talks about the 10 million that survived the Middle Passage, but only about a third of a million ended up in North America, which is a very tiny percentage of all those. The vast majority of those actually were shipped directly to the Caribbean and South America, and Brazil received almost 5 million Africans alone. So if you want to express your concern about the unbelievable rape of Africa and the slave trade, you have to go back to recognize that, first of all, a lot of those were taken by Arabs long before there was a Middle Passage to North America or South America. And more importantly, most of those slaves ended up in Brazil. Any individual that was abused in America is reason enough to certainly be sad and to see that this is still one of the saddest chapters in American history. But if you want to start putting it in perspective, this is the case. To finish it off, Larry Elder then spent a little bit of time reminding him of the fact that many of these African nations themselves certainly are to be blamed. And one example that he used was an apology that came a number of years ago from Ghana. The director of research and statistics at Ghana's Ministry of Tourism and Diaspora Relations, what a long title here, basically said, quote, the reason we wanted to do some formal thing, that is to apologize for their participation in the slave trade, is that we want, even if it's just on the surface of it for the cosmetic reasons, to be seen as saying sorry to those who feel very strongly in who we believe had distorted history, because they get the impression that it was people here who just took them and sold them. It's something we have to look straight in the face and try to address because it exists. So we will want to say something went wrong, people made mistakes, and we're sorry for whatever happened. So nevertheless, the whole point that Larry Elder was trying to make to his friend was, before you are ready to change your name to an Arabic name and reject Christianity as a white man's religion and say that the West deserves all sorts of blame for the slave trade, maybe you need to put it in a little more perspective. And once you begin to realize how many millions over 13 centuries were taken as slaves during the Arab conquest, especially during the Ottoman Empire, the horrific experiences of those individuals, many of whom died while crossing the Sahara Desert. Then when you do eventually get to the slave trade that most people focus their time and attention on, you're talking about those who were shipped to the New World, of which many died in passage or were killed or whatever. There were reasons for all of that taking place as well. That then when you talk about the 10 million that were shipped, almost 5 million of those ended up in Brazil. And as a result, that is the case. And then, of course, the final point that I make as a Christian, which Larry Elder really doesn't spend much time talking about, but many others have as well, the whole desire to actually eventually get rid of the slave trade, both in England and the abolition movement in the United States. And Larry Elder even ends with talking about the fact that 600,000 Americans in a country with less than 10% of today's population died in the Civil War that ended slavery. We see, again, Thomas Sowell saying that while slavery was common to all civilizations, only one civilization developed a moral revulsion against it very late in its history, and that is Western civilization. Not even the leading moralist in other civilizations rejected slavery at all. And the bottom line is, Larry Elder said after presenting some of this material to his friend decided not to change his name. So those are some points to remember as we now, over the next couple of months, maybe even years, we'll see the New York Times focusing time and attention on what they call the 1619 Project. And again, slavery is a very dark chapter in American history. So are the Indian Wars. But let's at least put some of that in perspective and recognize that even today, the reason we have a moral revulsion against slavery is because we start from a Judeo-Christian perspective that recognizes that all individuals, black or white, male or female, Jew or Gentile, all are created in God's image. Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to focus on a topic we've addressed here before, mentoring, and a very good book that came out a number of years ago by Howard Hendricks and Bill Hendricks, Iron Sharpens Iron, has now been updated, and it's entitled Men of Influence, A Transformational Impact of Godly Mentors. And so he'll be in studio with us, and we'll be talking about this very important topic of mentoring and how to find a good mentor, how to be a good mentor, and the importance of mentoring in our culture as well as in our churches. So that will be something we'll talk about right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. This hour we're going to spend some time talking about mentoring. That is a topic we've addressed before. Matter of fact, not so long ago, we even talked about a mentoring program for women. Diane Pattison and some of her associates have been with us as we've talked about this. We're going to focus on the men today, but I think you women can listen in as well, because there was a book that was published a number of years ago called Iron Sharpens Iron. It was written by Howard Hendricks and Bill Hendricks. Just an outstanding book. And even recently, as I was teaching on Titus 2, I was going to endorse that book and encourage people to buy it. And then just about the time I was ready to do that presentation in my Sunday school class, I found out about this book, which is, if you will, a revision and update on that book. And it's entitled Men of Influence: The Transformational Impact of Godly Mentors. And I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. We have in studio with us Bill Hendricks, who's a good friend, has been on the program with us before. He's the president of the Giftedness Center, the author of at least 23 different books, either books that he's authored or co-authored. One that certainly we still recommend on a regular basis, Your Work Matters to God, as well as The Person Called You, Why You're Here, Why You Matter, What You Do with Your Life. And, of course, this book that we're going to spend some time talking about, Men of Influence: The Transformational Impact of Godly Mentors. A graduate first at Harvard University, as well as having a Master of Science in Mass Communications from Boston University. Individual that also has a Master's of Arts degree, I should say, in the Biblical Studies from Dallas Theological Seminary, and currently a doctoral student as well, and an individual that has been a great friend. And this is just great to see this book in print once again in a new format. So tell us more about that.
Thanks, Kerby. It's great to be with you and your listeners again today.
And one of the things I might mention is that we also cross paths with you as the executive director of Christian leadership at the Hendricks Center.
Yes.
And a while back, I had a chance to hear you and Daryl Bach at Hendricks 2.0. But I think one of the stars that night was certainly your two people that were speaking. And, of course, we had some other outstanding speakers. But I was so impressed with your mom, Jeannie Hendricks, who just, in some respects, stole the show. And when you have Tim Keller and Daryl Bach and Bill Hendricks, it's kind of hard to steal the show. But she did a pretty good job.
She managed to do it, didn't she?
Yeah.
Well, you know, the Hendricks Center was founded under my dad, Howard Hendricks, at Dallas Seminary back in the mid-'80s. So it was time to kind of celebrate that institute, and then to celebrate the legacy, but look ahead into the future. We like to call it Hendricks 2.0. And Mom was kind of she was able to represent that great legacy, and I think she did an outstanding job that night doing so.
Very articulate and eloquent, and it was just a great night. And so, again, we'll talk a little bit later about the Hendricks Center, but also we have a lot of great information about this new book. And for those of you that are doing men's ministry, this is going to be absolutely key, because we see in Titus 2 that older men should minister to and disciple and mentor younger men, older women, younger women as well. And so we can see this. And what I thought was kind of interesting is you point out early on in the book that, look, I'm not going to improve on a book written by my father, Howard Hendricks, but I'm going to build on that foundation. And I thought that was really well said, because the book that was written before presumed a number of things, maybe white males in church. The reality is there's a lot more ethical and moral and ethnic and religious diversity now.
Significantly
and so you
more.
really have to talk about this in a way that you didn't talk about in the earlier book. Fair?
Yeah. Well, I realize, being a white male evangelical, there's a lot of people that are not like me, but they still need mentoring.
Yes.
And so I wanted to make this book something that lots and lots of men could embrace, both those who are looking for mentors and those who want to serve as mentors.
And what you're talking about here, clarify that for just a minute, because the nature of mentoring really gets us into this idea of the fact that there is discipleship, which churches understand, and there's mentoring. And I make the distinction, and maybe you can clarify it if you need to, that discipleship can happen in a huge group. I mean, I can disciple an entire class of people, and we can disciple individuals through ministries like Crew and Navigators and InterVarsity and those kinds of things. Churches can do a great discipleship, and it's curriculum-oriented. Mentoring is really kind of more one-on-one, face-to-face, is it not?
Yes, it is. It can be done in groups, small groups, I would say. But the thing about mentoring, and it can essentially overlap with discipleship, but what we're really talking about here is life on life.
Right.
One person impacting on another. Proverbs puts it this way: as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. And in the Hebrew, it actually just says iron sharpens iron. One man sharpens another. It just puts those two thoughts there side by side
and
yeah. lets you do the math. And when you think about that, what it's really saying is what we would say today, men have a way of rubbing off on each other. And they do. And that's an inevitable reality or phenomenon that takes place. And in the book, I point out if it's going to happen inevitably, well, then we can either do it intentionally or we can do it unintentionally, and we can do it well or we can do it poorly. Well, if it's going to happen anyway, why don't we at least try to do it intentionally and do it well, and hence the book.
And I think the other part of that I would make, and again, you can agree or disagree because I keep bringing all my own biases into this as well, that I think mentoring sort of happened naturally. Say, let's go back a whole century, maybe even back to the 19th century. Because if you wanted to learn a trade, you would
Correct.
be an apprentice.
Correct.
If you were growing up in a farm community, you would be learning farming from your father and grandfather and uncle and everybody else.
Exactly.
If you were a shopkeeper, you would be managing the shop. Now, that's different. First of all, I can say that it wasn't always wise to say that we could never allow children to do work, because I remember when my wife used to pick strawberries
Exactly.
and earned money for her contacts and her school supplies, and then they say, well, that's child labor. Well, no,
Actually not.
Not
I mean,
really.
it is, but it's a good child labor, if you could put it that way.
And so it seems like we had a lot more of that. And then, of course, we have broken families. So sometimes dad's not there to teach sons what is happening. So if this book was important a couple of decades ago or even a century ago,
right.
It's even more important now, don't you think?
Yes, because what happened was basically beginning with the 20th century, and particularly after World War II, the nature of work literally changed.
Yes.
In other words, the work moved from the land to the mind. Everybody's now what we call a knowledge worker for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
They're working with their minds. They're working with information. And we set up an educational system to prepare people to work in farm or in factories. Now we're trying to figure out how to prepare knowledge workers. But what happened when we prepared people for a factory economy, we lost mentoring. We lost that sense of apprenticeship. And what you discover in knowledge work is actually knowledge work needs apprenticing to take place, because the kinds of things we're teaching knowledge workers, which is things like how to make a decision about who to make a loan to, or how do you hire somebody, or how do you run a meeting. These are much more sophisticated kinds of endeavors. You can't just hand somebody a book and they figure that out. They need to watch. They need to try their hand. They need somebody to debrief with them and give them pointers. That's really mentoring, and that's what we need today.
We're going to take a break, and of course, this is an expert at giftedness, and that's another element in this book that's been added, so we'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Earlier this year, conservative activist Scott Presler sent out a call to action asking people to join him in cleaning up trash in Baltimore. More than 170 volunteers worked from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. picking up over 12 tons of trash. You would think that picking up trash would not lead to the local paper trashing your efforts. You would be wrong. The editorial board of the Baltimore Sun ran an op-ed that trashed Presler and his group. First, they made this snarky comment. They said, "We assume that it was pure motives that led a Trump supporter to lead a cleanup in Cummings' district, right?" Scott Presler even said that this wasn't a political action. He and others saw the need and decided to do something about it. Now, let's be honest. There were probably some mixed motives, but if your only motive was to embarrass a member of Congress, you could do that by calling the media together, pick up some trash in one street, and then go home. More than 100 people worked 12 hours picking up 12 tons of trash. These volunteers were motivated, but they probably won't be motivated to do something like this next time. Back when I was the president of our high school service organization, we spent a day picking up trash and cleaning up a town. The local paper ran a small story about it. If the writer criticized us like the Baltimore Sun, I doubt I would have been able to get anyone to volunteer for the next service project. Oh, and the editors weren't finished. They also complained that the cleanup reinforces the tired image of our failing urban cores, that poor people in this dilapidated city can't take care of their own neighborhoods. What a contrast to a few of the posted videos that showed people in this neighborhood who were appreciative of what was done. Sadly, in this politicized society, no good work goes unpunished. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Affirm Films and the Kendrick Brothers, Overcomer, starring Alex Kendrick and Priscilla Shire, rated PG, in theaters this Friday. Overcomermovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again in studio with us today, Bill Hendricks, and again, co-author of this book, Men of Influence. But I might also point to another book that we've talked with you before about, A Person Called You, Why You're Here, Why You Matter, What You Should Do With Your Life, which is part of the Giftedness Center.
Yes.
And it's thegiftednesscenter.com. We have that linked on the website.
Excellent.
And in here, you add a section, just you mention it, but then come back to it later on giftedness.
Mm-hmm.
That's something to think about when you're talking about mentoring, isn't it?
It's incredibly important. Our culture doesn't know how to get people from high school graduation into the adult world of work. And everybody thinks college is going to help you figure that out. And, you know, quite apart from the fact that many people don't go to college, colleges have no vested interest in helping you figure that out. The result is we've got millions of young adults who are sort of lost as lambs trying to figure out what to do with their life. What they need is somebody to help them discover this reality about who they are that we call their giftedness. And the simplest definition I have for giftedness is what you're born to do.
Right.
Everybody is born to do something. Everybody's been designed by God for a particular thing that they do, a particular purpose that they fulfill. And in the book, I talk about how a mentor figure, through a fairly simple process of telling some stories and looking for some patterns, could help somebody begin to wake up to at least the basic dynamics of how God has designed them, and then help them think meaningfully about, well, where might we apply that in this wide world of work?
And again, I encourage people to contact the Giftedness Center because it does two things. Number one, it tells you the things not to do. Young people come up with the craziest ideas, including my oldest daughter, which we always love to use as an example, but I won't embarrass her, that came up with all sorts of crazy ideas, which she should never have done. And fortunately, we could kill those ideas off. And then number two, to do what God has uniquely gifted you to do. And so if you're kind of struggling with that, we're obviously focusing today on the book Men of Influence, but I do commend to you the book and even the link that we have here for you to find out more about giftedness. Maybe there's a giftedness coach that you've already trained in your area of locality, because we broadcast in 42 different states. So not everybody's going to come to Dallas to meet with you, but I would recommend it because it would be money well spent.
Well, and of course, there's always Skype and Zoom, too. So we work at distances as well.
Yeah, so again, I want you to know about that, and that book is outstanding. And if you are still trying to figure what you are doing out, and you may be a college graduate, but I've seen some people with major midlife reevaluations that say, I've been traveling down the wrong road, and I missed that fork a long time ago, or I've been climbing the ladder of success and realized it was leaning against the wrong wall. So those are just some things to think about. But let's get back to practical stuff. Chapter 5, I still think, is one of the most important. Whom to look for and what mentors look for in you.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are saying, I'm really interested in finding a godly man. It might not even be a Christian man, but in most cases we would hope it would be a Christian man, but I don't know what to look for. I have a church full of people. I have LinkedIn full of people. I have Facebook friends. But what should I look for? So, Bill, help us out with that.
Well, first of all, you need to do some thought or assessment, if I can use that word. And we talk about how to do this in the book. When you say you need a mentor, tell me what's behind that. In other words, is there a specific skill that you want to learn how to do? Are you trying to answer some question about yourself or a question about life? And having sort of thought about, if I had a mentor, what would I hope to gain from him? Well, then you need to find somebody who looks like they have that.
Yes.
I mean, I think one of the examples I give in the book is you may think, I really need somebody who could help me figure out money. I don't understand budgeting. I don't understand credit cards. I don't understand finance. Well, then as you sort of troll through prospective mentors, you might want to check out, does this person show any sort of aptitude for dealing with money? Mm-hmm. Or are they themselves chronically in debt, and they don't know how to save and that sort of thing. So that'd be one place to start. Obviously, you try to discern as you begin to interact with this person, do they look like they're even open to a relationship?
That's true, yeah.
Because not everybody's going to be. That's going to be a big help. And then another piece that I point out here is, what do other people say about this person?
Well said.
Reputation's important. It's not, we don't want to make it an idol of what people think of us, but the point is, and I'm thinking particularly of character here.
Yes.
Is this a person that other people seem to respect and trust? Like, do they go to him for his opinion on things? Or are there some dark sides here that you kind of maybe need to at least be aware of before you get tangled up with this person?
The other thing is, you also have how prospective mentors look at you, and some of them, are you ready? Are you capable of a relationship? Are you teachable? If somebody came to me or to you and said, look, I really want to learn from you, the first question I have is, okay, if I give you some ideas, you're going to do anything with them? Or
Correct.
Am I just going to be talking, you're going to be listening, taking some notes, but we're going to be in the same position 6 months from now that we are right now?
Right.
So that's a good question to ask, isn't it?
It is. Nobody wants to waste their time.
Mm-hmm.
And believe me, a mentor, particularly if he's an older mentor, he's got a lot to do. I find that men who are inclined toward mentoring love to give somebody some insight and some input. But if the person turns around and either does nothing with it, or worse, takes what you've given them, and they're going to do what they're going to do anyway.
Yeah.
I got better things to do with my time than that.
I think so. One of the other things is you talk about putting yourself in opportunity's path. And I thought that was really helpful, because a lot of people say, okay, how do I find them? Well, first of all, pray for them. There are some places to look. and some other questions. So you really address those. Can you help us out there?
Kerby, it's the issue of intentionality.
Yeah.
First of all, pray, and I don't put that in the book lightly. I believe very, very strongly in the importance and the power of prayer. If you sincerely are looking for someone and want somebody to build into your life, you need to trust God for that. You need to ask God. He's more interested in you growing than you are. So he's probably got somebody appointed out there, but you need to start praying. But then having prayed, it's amazing how prayer and action go together.
Right.
You can't just like sit by the phone and hope that it, rings and you pick it up and it's like, hello, I'm your mentor. That's not going to happen in most cases. So putting yourself in opportunity's path means circulating in some places, some likely places where you think mentors might show up. Since I know many of our listeners are people of faith, obviously a church setting would be one of the first places to start looking for somebody. Believe it or not, many of these people are right under your nose in your workplace. They're perhaps some older people that work there. They may not work in your particular office or your particular division of the enterprise, but they're there. And so what you want to do is start getting yourself into some conversations with other men, find out a little bit about them, and just start to think through in your mind, does this look like somebody that I might want to build a relationship with and see where that goes? And then if there's chemistry, I'll put it that way, all you got to do is say, hey, could I buy you a cup of coffee? I got some questions I'd like to ask somebody. And y'all go to a Starbucks or whatever, and you sit down and you start, telling your story and asking some questions. And you just see where it goes. You cannot make a relationship happen, but you can at least put yourself in the path for it to happen.
That's very good. And one of the other questions maybe we'll get to after the break, what about men who are not Christians? And what about the initial contact and how to do that and some of the real specific material? But let me very quickly suggest that this is a book that I think many of you are going to want to have access to. And as I was looking through this, I was thinking how many times we've interviewed some of the people that you actually have endorsements from, Jim Cody and Raymond Harris and Jerry White and Dave Ridley and on and on. I mean, these are just all sorts of people that we've known over the years. And you even pointed out that when the book went to press, you then got some other endorsements afterwards. So this is kind of a who's who. And if you have the old book, which I do, as a matter of fact, I meant to bring it in here today. I'm going to hold it up later when I do my Bible study on this. In 1995, Iron Sharpens Iron. This is now the 2019 book. And if you find yourself saying, I'd like to get a copy, first of all, it's just out. So if you go to the bookstore, they don't have it say, well, it's Moody Publishers, and they could order it. But we've also made it very easy for you to order it as well. We have a link to the Giftedness Center, but we also have a place where you can order it both on paperback and Kindle. And I would recommend that those of you that are especially in a men's ministry, this is a resource that, first of all, you're going to want to have in people's hands. And there's a way in which you could even use this as a Bible study or a small group study.
Absolutely.
So when we come back from the break, I want to talk about all the different ways we can use this and the Giftedness Center. And we have a lot more to cover, but I'll open up the phones now at a risk. 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
From Affirm Films, Provident Films, and the Kendrick Brothers comes Overcomer. John Harrison is a frustrated coach questioning his value until he crosses paths with a student struggling on her own journey.
What have you allowed to define you? When you find your identity in the one who created you, it'll change your whole perspective.
Overcomer, starring Alex Kendrick and Priscilla Shirer. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. In theaters this Friday. More information is available at overcomermovie.com.
It's been said that a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting on its shoes. That was definitely true in the 19th century when preacher Charles Spurgeon said it. But here in the 21st century, truth can be just as fast. Think about it. When Point of View presents the truth, it reaches people across America and around the world instantly. You make that instant truth a reality when you join the Point of View Radio Truth Team. Get all the details now at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Bill Hendricks in studio with us as we talk about this new book, Men of Influence. And again, I think this is a book that you are certainly wanting to get a copy of. About 280 pages, published by Moody Publishers. And also we have a link to the Giftedness Center. TheGiftednessCenter.com is an easy way to find it. Don't have to remember all that because we have a link there. And another book I highly recommend to many of our listeners, The Person Called You, Why You're Here, Why You Matter, and What You Should Do with Your Life, because a lot of people, male or female, need to figure out what God has uniquely gifted them to do and then go out and do it. But talk about how to use this book, because you have that material on the website. People probably can find the book in their local bookstore, so we hope they will do so. But this would be just a great series of Bible studies or small group, wouldn't they?
Absolutely. I know that there are many groups of men out there who meet, for instance, for breakfast once a week, and they're always looking for something to talk about. And I would encourage them to get this book, and particularly if they're older men, the second half of the book kind of challenges, but also talks about how could you become a man of influence for men who are younger than you are. Kerby, this is a huge need in our culture. The millennial generation, research has been done that shows that as a generation, they're crying out for mentors. At Dallas Seminary, where we have the Hendricks Center, just this past week, a guy who's a former pastor said, "I'm willing to come over and meet with people that are training to be pastors, essentially kind of a mentoring conversation." And so they put out the word that was going to happen, and instantly they got 50 people signed up.
50 students wanting to learn
just
from
like
a former pastor.
And
sure. Why wouldn't you?
Well, absolutely, because there's somebody who's got experience and knows what they're talking about. And okay, so that's in the pastorate. What about people in the financial community? What about people in law? What about people in medicine? What about people in sales? I mean, just every occupation. If you've been in that occupation for any length of time, you are worth gold to somebody who's just starting out.
I would think so. Let's, if we can, maybe for just a minute, talk about some of the myths that are surrounding this.
Yes.
And I think some have said, well, to be a mentor, you got to be, 83 years of age. You got to be perfect.
Right.
You've got to have been highly successful. And what happens, Bill, is there are a number of individuals, probably dozens and dozens, even in a church, that say, I want a mentor. But the older men say, and I mean older in the sense spiritually, they may not be older in terms of having gray hair or something like that, but the older men say, well, what do I have to offer?
I'm not qualified.
Yeah, so answer that question.
Well, part of it is we have to demystify this whole mentoring thing. Just like you said, the myth is that a mentor is this sage who's got all this wisdom accumulated and basically has all the answers that somebody's going to need. That's actually not where the concept of mentoring came from. A mentor is a figure in an ancient poem that the Greeks wrote called the Odyssey, but he's a minor character in that story, okay? And he was not at all a wise, sage person. In fact, the one job he had, which was to kind of oversee the estate of the Odysseus who goes on this journey, he blows that assignment. When Odysseus comes back, the estate is in disarray. So where did we get this idea that mentoring is that way? Well, there was a French mystic named Fenelon in the 15th century, and he was an apprentice for the royal court preparing future kings. And so he had this vision of what a king ought to be like, and he took that character, mentor, and you know how like Disney or somebody will take a classic, Pocahontas or something, and then they'll make a whole movie out of it. They'll sort of take a myth and re-mythologize it. Well, that's what Fenelon did with Mentor. And so Telemachus, who is Odysseus' son, and Mentor go on this voyage, and sure enough, Mentor has all the answers to everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we think that a mentor is somebody who has all the answers to everything. But that's not really how mentoring works. If you have any experience in life, maybe you've had some failures in life, maybe you've been kicked around by life, and you've got some savvy just because of it, some street smarts is what we'd say. If you've got any skills that you've developed, if you've got any networks that you've developed, if you've got any relationships that you've developed, you already have a boatload of stuff to offer somebody who's just taking their first steps The basic thing boils down to this, particularly when it comes to men. A mentor, and I'm going to use a Greek term here, and I don't mean to, I don't want to turn this into a Greek lesson, but what a mentor is basically trying to impart is what we call menos. Menos means a heroic mindset.
Mm-hmm.
If I could put this on everyday language, men, particularly when they're in learning phase, feel really incompetent. I mean, whether it's learning to catch a bass, driving a car, a trade, a profession, whatever. When you're starting out, you instinctively think, I don't know what I'm doing here. And what a mentor does more than anything else is to encourage the person to believe in themselves. Oh, you actually do have what it takes. Try your hand. I'll show you how. I'll walk alongside you. And as you take those first baby steps in, my sister calls young adults toddler adults, because it's one step forward, fall down, pick them up, take another couple steps. As you're getting your sea legs, as it were, what that mentor figure does is helps you begin to believe in yourself, gain confidence that you really can do whatever it is you're trying to do.
That's really well done. Just before I take some phone calls, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Before I went to the break, I talked about one of the sections you have here. What about men who are not Christians? Obviously it would be great to have a Christian mentor, but that's not essential, is it?
Some of my best mentors in life have been men who were not people of faith. And obviously I wish they were. But they had something. It could have been a skill that they really were the best at, like they knew how to do that about as well as anybody. Well, I want to learn under them because you learn from the best. Or frankly, let's face it, God gives humanity what we would call common grace.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most successful entrepreneurs in Dallas's history, he built his company on the golden rule. He said, I want to treat my customers the way I would want to be treated if I was the customer. This man, by his own admission, was not a person of faith. But that value alone, he practiced. And I and everybody who's ever been near him, around him, under him, worked for him, they would say, the one thing that I learned was I treat other people the way I want to be treated. He served as a mentor for literally tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people.
Good illustration. One more. You have a distinction between formal mentoring and informal.
Yeah.
I think some people are going to get in their minds, okay, well, I got to put this in, all this organization and all that kind of stuff, and we have to meet on the same time every week. That's not necessarily the case, right?
No. Formal mentoring programs are where a company, let's say, or a college or university, they assign a what they call a protege, a younger person, to a mentor, okay? And then as part of the program, those two are supposed to get together periodically. Sometimes the mentor has provided some written materials by which they organize whatever they're going to talk about. And it's kind of a requirement of employment, okay? The vast majority of mentoring is what we call informal. In other words, it takes place just in everyday conversations, over cups of coffee, over water coolers, in car rides. I mean, it's two men just interacting with each other. And here's what's really crazy about it. Oftentimes, mentoring is taking place when neither man recognizes it's taking place.
Isn't that something?
In fact, my definition of mentoring is mentoring occurs if the person who is, quote, being mentored someday looks back and says, if it weren't for so-and-so, I would never be the person I am today.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, that's something else that our new technologies provided. You and I are old enough to remember when we weren't necessarily being able to use cell phones and Skype and things like that. And some of the mentoring programs we've talked about here actually take place in FaceTime or Skype or Zoom or something like that.
Absolutely.
Let's take a phone call along the way. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Jason in California, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Hello, how you doing today?
We're good.
Jason.
Great. I got a glimpse. I just was able to hear a little bit of it, and I kind of just wanted to show or just say how important it was. It could be to mentoring. I was raised in the streets, no father, no mother, addicted to heroin. Pretty much no chance at life. I became an adult. institutions, went to prison for 11 years, got out, and I don't even know what I didn't even know what to do. Like, just simple parenting skills, simple life skills. I mean, there's just so much that I don't know how to do. And I'm 43 years old today, and I've been out 10 years, and I work. But let me tell you, life has hit me pretty hard, and still trying to figure out today. How I wish I could have found a mentor.
Very good. We'll take a break, and we'll talk a little bit about that right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and we have in studio with us Bill Hendricks, co-author of the book Men of Influence, which is really kind of an update from Iron Sharpens Iron. And Jason in California gave a good illustration. When we think about mentoring, sometimes we're thinking, well, I want to learn about finance, or I learn about maybe homemaking or something like this, but I just want to learn how to be a parent. And for a whole generation that have had absent fathers and mothers, sometimes that's another aspect of mentoring I'd never even thought about.
Oh, it's a huge aspect. I mean, how do we learn to be adults?
Yes.
Yes, we want our parents to ideally help us learn how to be adults. We still need other adults help us learn to be adults. So I think Jason's situation is actually quite common. One thing it points out is it's never too old to look for mentors. I realize that a lot of his raising of his kids and so forth, that era is behind him. But even now, there's a lot he could benefit from having an older man come alongside him at, I think he said he was 46, in his 40s, he's got a lot of life left to live. And granted, maybe he's made some mistakes or gone down some paths. That's a guy who really would benefit from somebody saying, hey, look, man, you're a good man. You're going to make it. I'll walk alongside you. Now, by the same token, I heard him say, how I wish I could have only had a mentor. There are two men who make excellent mentors in particular. Mm-hmm. One is the guy who says, I had a man who made all the difference for me, and they were mentored. Well, then they need to pay it back. They need to go find some younger men and start to pay it back. But believe it or not, Jason has all the potential to make an outstanding mentor. He knows what the sad consequences are from not having somebody build into his life. And so even as he seeks older men to build into his life, he can also be looking at men who are behind him coming up and say, listen, bud, I don't want you to make some of the same mistakes I did. Let me walk alongside you, and let's do this life together.
One of the things I'm hoping that maybe we can do with this book is have you come on a Tuesday with Nick Pitts, Nick Pitts, Dr. Nick Pitts, and talk about that with the millennial generation.
Would love to do it.
You have found, as I have as well, that almost the younger you are, the more likely you are to be looking for mentors.
Yes.
And so that is the case. But a couple of things in the book, I mean, again, there's no way we'll cover all of it, but one of the chapters was, where does this process end up? A lot of people say, okay, I think I can understand how it starts, and you really have some great material here about what to do, how to do it, what the character of an individual is, and those kinds of things. But some people sort of say, well, what's the end point? How does that play out? Can you speak to that?
Well, obviously, the end point, in one sense, the purpose, the gain here is when somebody builds into my life, I grow, I develop, I become a better person, I become more mature, I start to have some insight. Okay, so I can only benefit from that, and so the end game, if you will, is my personal growth and development. But if I only look at it that way, it's a little bit selfish. Here's what we need to see. Mentoring is a lifelong process, and ideally, like when you're in your teens and 20s, for the most part, they're going to be men building into you, and then you grow and you develop, and you start to get into your late 20s, 30s, 40s. Okay, now you start to have peer relationships where you're basically building into some other guys. And frankly, you're starting to build into some younger men. And then the day comes when, all the way to the last, you still need men building into your life. But for the most part, it's you giving to younger men. And it's like a grove of trees that are constantly repopulating themselves is kind of the image here.
That's really good. One of the sections you have that I just thought I'd mention real quickly is what to watch out for, because even though we're being very positive, there are a couple of maybe, if you will, warning signs, right? Aren't there?
Absolutely. One challenge that mentors can face is they start to kind of try to live vicariously through the person that they're trying to influence. In other words, that person's success becomes essentially, my success. And I think we need to not get into that. We need to allow that younger person, as they start to see gains in their life, let's salute that. Let's say, man, I want you to essentially eclipse me. I want you to outshine me. Yeah, another danger here is I start to get jealous of somebody because I kind of find out, gosh, they're actually better than that than I am. I feel like I just gave away all my secrets. Well, that's what mentoring kind of about. It's telling people, here's kind of the secrets.
Yeah. And it really is kind of a kingdom mentality. I mean, if you're in it for yourself, then mentoring may not work. But if you're saying, look, if somebody else exceeds my ability, or if they build on my foundation and I help them to vicariously avoid all the pitfalls and mistakes I make, he's going to be a lot further along the road than anybody else. So that's just another great benefit of mentoring, isn't it?
Yeah. You and I have a friend who's now with the Lord named Bob Buford, who wrote Halftime.
Oh, what a great book.
From Success to Significance.
One of the best.
Yeah. And one of Bob's favorite sayings was, a lot of my fruit is going to grow up on somebody else's tree.
Well said.
And Kerby, honestly, on a daily basis, I run into people and realize some fruit that Bob basically gave the seed for is now growing up on somebody else's tree. But that's the way it's supposed to be. God has put us into this world not just for our own benefit. He's put us into the world for the benefit of others, for the life of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm not investing in other men and other people, I'm like one of there's a story in the Old Testament where there's a city that's sacked or that's under siege, and then God destroys the army that's invading, and they run off and they leave all this plunder.
Right.
And there's some lepers outside.
Yeah, and they're the ones that go find it.
They
right.
go find all the spoils, and they're out there gorging themselves and trying to carry away all the gold and clothing. And one of them finally says, what we're doing isn't right here. There's people starving in this city. We need to let them know all this stuff is out here.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I feel. If I've found some treasure in life that God has shown me and given me, man, I need to get that away to other people. I'd be selfish to hold on to it just for myself.
Well, one of the things I want to point people to is the Giftedness Center, because that's one of the ways that you have been giving back to the body of Christ for literally now decades.
Yeah.
And so you can find out more not only about this book, Men of Influence, but again, one that I've sort of been also promoting as well. The person called you, why you're here, why you matter, what you should do with your life. And if you're still trying to figure out where you are headed in life, you may be just a recent college graduate and really confused about that, but you might be in your mid-life challenges and
you
really
might
begin
you might be one of those half-timers. You may be getting ready to retire, and you're
saying,
thinking,
what next?
What's next?
Yeah, and you have done such an outstanding job over the years of helping people find their giftedness. So again,
Thanks.
Benefit from the work, first of all, of Bill Hendricks and even the legacy of Howard Hendricks.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all part of this book, Men of Influence. We have a link to thegiftednesscenter.com. You should be able to find the book in your local bookstore, about 280 pages. It's published by our good friends at Moody Publishing. But if you can't find it there, we have a link to paperback and Kindle. And I would encourage you to start reading it. And those of you in men's ministry, buy them by the crate.
It's a must
buy
read.
them by the crate, and it will change the lives of all the men in your area of ministry, and you will bear the fruit of that in your own church, in your own community. So, Bill Hendricks, I'm sure this will not be the last time we have you on talking about this book. We'll see if we can get you on the Millennial Roundtable, but thank you for joining
Kerby.
me today here on
Thanks
Point
for
of View.
having me. It's been a joy.
We've enjoyed him, and of course, you think about the old books of exit interviews and Your Work Matters to God, and 24 books. So if you want to read Bill Hendricks, there are a lot of great books out there. So again, let me commend that to you. And it's all at our website, pointofview.net. We're going to take a break, and we have a lot more to cover. Interestingly enough, 2 more guests in the next hour, and one of those will be in studio, Nicole C. Mullin. So you've got a lot to hear from yet. So we'll cover all of that right after these important messages.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
If you listen to this program any length of time, you know that we've oftentimes talked about the alleviation of poverty and the ways in which we can possibly do that, and especially trying to eliminate extreme poverty around the world, and even to address the issue of poor and poverty here in the United States. And this is another book that I think would be very helpful to you. So we're going to focus some time and attention on this for this first half hour. Then we'll have Nicole C. Mullin in studio with us for the last half hour. And this is a book co-authored by Brian Furkert. If he is sounding familiar to you, he, as well as Steve Corbett, wrote the book When Helping Hurts: How to Alleviate Poverty Without Hurting the Poor and Yourself. This book, entitled Becoming Whole, also co-authored by Dr. Kelly Kapic, is a book that is really going to address this issue of poverty, but also, just as it says, why the opposite of poverty isn't the American dream. Dr. Kelly Kapic is the professor of theological studies at Covenant College, which is in Lookout Mountain there in Georgia, has his doctorate from King's College, and if you're familiar with him, you may be familiar with his book Embodied Hope, a theological meditation on pain and suffering. There are a number of YouTube videos of him on that topic, and this is a conversation I know that you would enjoy having. So, Dr. Kapic, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks for having me.
I might just mention, too, that this book is endorsed by lots of people that have been on this program, like Russell Moore, Daryl Miller, who we've had on talking about discipling nations, Daryl Bockhorst just down the road from us, Scott Sauls, as well as a variety of others, Richard Stearns. And it really kind of gets us into one of the interesting ironies that I was talking about actually just 2 hours ago with Dr. Jim Denison, and you deal with this in the book early on, and that is when you look at the real income per capita, it has continued to increase, but if you look at happiness, it is really dropping rather dramatically. And some of my more recent commentaries have been about what I call these deaths of despair, individuals who are committing suicide, individuals that have drug overdoses. You even have a chart there on the long-run trends of depression among U.S. students. And yet we are some of the most affluent and some of the most privileged Christians to have ever lived on this planet, yet we seem to be some of the most depressed and discouraged. Talk about that.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, it affects us culturally in North America, but as you say, it includes the church. And as we're writing primarily to Christians, one of the things that we realized is Christians often do have a heart to help the poor, which is fantastic. That's one of our main concerns. But what we've often slipped into without realizing it is the goal ends up, even though we don't say it this way, the goal ends up to help poor people become just like us, which means affluent, and which often means unhappy and miserable. And so part of us is asking, what's interesting is even though we're concerned with poverty alleviation, we actually think not just materially poor people are in need, but we are in need who are more affluent, and that all of us have kind of gotten sidetracked, and we need a more holistic understanding of the gospel and what is the flourishing life before God and neighbor. What does that look like? And it probably doesn't just look like a suburb. It looks more like the New Jerusalem.
Yes. And let's talk about one of the illustrations you use, because I like baseball. We're in baseball season, and you talk about the fact that we sort of look at things one-dimensionally, but let's talk about some of those particular baseball stadiums. Of course, we have football stadiums, too, where you can retract the roof or not, but sometimes people aren't even aware that the roof has been removed because they're focused on the field. And you use that as an illustration to say that if we are sort of one-dimensional Christians, or we're like people on flat land, you use a number of different illustrations there, we miss just so much a part of the gospel, don't we?
Yeah, we do. I mean, it almost becomes cliche, but on Sundays we say we believe that God is the Lord, He's the King of heaven and earth, He reigns and rules, we worship. But the reality is, we do often wonder, what about our lives Monday through Saturday? We kind of know, okay, we're supposed to avoid kind of sinning and, doing some bad things and gossiping and stealing. We should kind of do that. But Christians really sometimes struggle, like, what is the meaning of life before we die? Because sometimes the gospel we proclaim is, you need to believe in Jesus, you'll get saved, you'll go to heaven. But if you do that, what about the rest of your life? And part of it is Monday through Saturday, we live as if in this flatland, what we see is all there is. And God is actually working in this world and has concerns, and there are things that He is doing and He invites us to participate in. But Monday through Saturday, we often don't live very differently than the non-believer.
Yes.
If that makes any sense.
It makes sense, and obviously, interestingly enough, when we've had people like George Barna on this program, or Dave Kinnaman, or whoever, they say, yeah, the sad reality is when we try to look at any kind of sociological indicator that would demonstrate that this person is a Christian versus a non-Christian, we don't find very many, because Christians live a lot like the non-Christians, and we sort of bought into this materialistic individualism where the gross national product doesn't manifest itself in the gross national happiness, as you say. So this is kind of the reason you've written this book. And I use the example that you talk about there in the Sky Dome and Flatland and whatever. But before we take a break, talk about why we need to maybe change our perspective, because we tend to sort of think sometimes that if we can just give people enough money, happiness will follow. And we now, I think, know that isn't the case, is it?
Yeah, well, and I really liked how you set that up, because you mentioned the individualism and the materialism. Many of us really have just become individualists, and it affects how we think of the poor people. We think, well, they just need to try harder. But the reality is, all of us are in these webs and connections, and some are working more ably than others. But sometimes we have affluence, and we're so lonely. We're so depressed. One of the things we can learn is that we need other people. And sometimes, and part of what we want to say is, it's not just materially poor people who need more well-off Christians. Well-off Christians need materially poor Christians to help them understand the gospel. We've missed some of the good news that we're part of the people of God, that we are to genuinely love one another and inhabit one another's lives and enter into space with one another in community in ways that's just vanishing.
Well, again, we need to take a break, and we will continue our conversation. I just wanted you to know about this book, and it is worth even a full discussion, but I just wanted to at least to give you an understanding of the fact that there is this great book out, and it's entitled Becoming Whole, Why the Opposite of Poverty Isn't the American Dream. And when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the solutions to it, about almost 300 pages published by Moody Publishers. It has been out for a while, so I think you should be able to find it in your local bookstore. But if not, we have a way in which you can order it, both by paperback and Kindle. And I also, when we come back, maybe want to spend just a little bit of time, Kelly, talking about how this would be a great study to do with a small group, because you've put it together in a way that would be a really good guided study, and there's a set of reflection questions. So we'll talk more about how to use the book right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Earlier this year, conservative activist Scott Presler sent out a call to action asking people to join him in cleaning up trash in Baltimore. More than 170 volunteers worked from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. picking up over 12 tons of trash. You would think that picking up trash would not lead to the local paper trashing your efforts. You would be wrong. The editorial board of the Baltimore Sun ran an op-ed that trashed Presler and his group. First, they made this snarky comment. They said, "We assume that it was pure motives that led a Trump supporter to lead a cleanup in Cummings District, right?" Scott Presler even said that this wasn't a political action. He and others saw the need and decided to do something about it. Now, let's be honest. There were probably some mixed motives, but if your only motive was to embarrass a member of Congress, you could do that by calling the media together, pick up some trash in one street, and then go home. More than 100 people worked 12 hours picking up 12 tons of trash. These volunteers were motivated, but they probably won't be motivated to do something like this next time. Back when I was the president of our high school service organization, we spent a day picking up trash and cleaning up a town. The local paper ran a small story about it. If the writer criticized us like the Baltimore Sun, I doubt I would have been able to get anyone to volunteer for the next service project. Oh, and the editors weren't finished. They also complained that the cleanup reinforces the tired image of our failing urban cores, that poor people in this dilapidated city can't take care of their own neighborhoods. What a contrast to a few of the posted videos that showed people in this neighborhood who were appreciative of what was done. Sadly, in this politicized society, no good work goes unpunished. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Affirm Films and the Kendrick Brothers, Overcomer, starring Alex Kendrick and Priscilla Shire, rated PG, in theaters this Friday. Overcomermovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Talking about the book, Becoming Whole. It is published by our friends at Moody Publishing, and you should be able to find it in your local bookstore. But if not, we have a link to it as well. And Kelly, for just a minute, let's, if we can, talk about the fact that you've got 3 parts but 10 chapters, but you've written it in such a way that you have a number of questions for reflection at the end. And so those reflection questions, along with this book, could be just a very significant way that individuals in a small group or a Bible study could begin to challenge some of the ways in which we're living out our Christianity, which sometimes you refer to as kind of an evangelical Gnosticism, or maybe a flatland, or, you know, all sorts of illustrations we can talk about there. So talk about how individuals might be able to study this on their own, but also how they could maybe use this in a small group study as well.
Yeah, thanks for suggesting that. Actually, we have churches across the country and actually different parts of the world who have done just that. And I do think when you start to talk about some of these issues, it's much nicer to read slowly and with others and talk about it. It's personal. We're all trying to understand areas where maybe we've misunderstood, and maybe we've been told a story about the good news that doesn't seem like good news, and maybe there's some things we need to learn. And so we talk about some of that. If your view of heaven is that you're going to die and sing in a choir for 1,000,000 years, the honest truth is that probably doesn't sound very appealing to you, and that affects how we talk through some of that. But what we found is, small groups who go through a chapter a week or whatever they do and talk about it, it often is really nice. Or churches that want to think about how to reach out in their communities and do it well, because motive isn't the only thing that matters. We want to be thoughtful about how we care for people. And so we found that helpful. And I would also encourage your listeners to check out the Chalmers Center. You can go online. They have lots of free resources, and you can even be in touch. They help churches all the time who care about these issues to think about them well. And it's a fantastic resource. So much of it is free. So I would recommend small groups and then getting in touch with the Chalmers Center or looking at their website for all the great resources.
Very good resources. Let me just mention that part one was Shaping Stories, Power of Stories. Part two, When False Stories Make Helping Hurt. And, of course, that's where you talk about be a harp-playing ghost forever. Boy, that really rings my bell. But I wanted to focus most of our time with you for a few more minutes on God's story of change. And you talk about this idea of escaping flatland, reconsidering creation. Help us out, because this is, of course, something we would encourage people to study and to read carefully and slowly. But give us kind of the overview for just a few minutes, because if indeed we have kind of a flatland mindset, if we are perceiving the world through the sky dome illustration I used a minute ago, then how do we break out and begin to get true Christian flourishing in the 21st century?
Yeah, it's a great question, and you're right. It could be a lot longer, but let's say a few things about it. I actually am pretty convinced that evangelical Christians, we don't always have a very good doctrine or understanding of creation. That may sound funny because people think we talk about that all the time, but here's the test. If when I say the doctrine of creation, you think we're going to talk about just debating evolution, that shows where we all of the sudden, people, when they think creation, only think, when did God do it and how did he do it? But to understand what redemption means, we have to understand the God of creation is the God of redemption. He cares about our bodies. He cares about our whole selves. And souls matter, and we talk about souls, and we want to be very careful here, but to understand what God is doing even now, we have to appreciate what he has done and where he's taking us to, and this participating in this new creation. And so even starting to think about when Jesus comes and John the Baptist is in prison, says, "Are you the one?" Sends people to ask. He says, "Well, tell John, the blind see, the lame walk, the deaf hear, and the euangelion, the good news is preached to the poor." Now, it's interesting. Those things that Jesus did are not just proof that he's the Messiah, although they are that, but it also shows God cares about how he made people to see and to hear and to walk and to be whole, and we should care about those things. So we never want to lose sight of who Christ is, but to be whole, we need to reconnect people with the Creator and Redeemer and with other humans. And to get and also a doctrine of creation, when you lose your job, there is something off with your relationship with creation, and that starts to affect all these other things. So it's amazing how interconnected everything is, and that's part of what we're trying to slowly help people see, is that this isn't just about throwing money at somebody. If someone's poor, it may be that they don't need money. It may be they need a support system. If your whole life you've been told you're stupid and you can't do anything, what you really need is a team of people who encourage you, who tell you stick with it, you can do it. So, sorry, it's a longer answer, but those are some of the ways we'd want to encourage people to start thinking about how we change and what God is doing.
And how that fits very much with the conversation we had last hour in studio with Bill Hendricks and the idea of mentoring and having individuals be an encouragement to you and the rest. Another part of creation is this idea of culture formation and cultural engagement. And I think that's something that is now starting to flourish as well in some churches. But again, that part comes from our doctrine of creation, because after all, we are to take the good news to more than just the souls, but to the whole aspect, the whole body. And that is something that we need to recover as well here in the 21st century. True?
Yeah, that's right. That's beautiful. And, I was just listening to your thing in the break, and you talked about a story of people picking up trash, and that stuff matters.
It does.
How we see the environment, how we see ourselves really matters. And again, part of the message of the book is, it is not that materially poor people need us. We need each other. We are all sinners before a holy, loving God. We need to be reconnected to each other. And it's hard for us not to be arrogant. It's hard for us not to walk in thinking we have all the solutions. We need to learn to be better listeners. Often with poverty alleviation, we walk in and say, oh, this is what you need, and they don't. We need to find what gifts they have to offer and help them cultivate those.
So again, I just think this is a great resource that people can work their way through. I like all sorts of disclaimers there when we've talked about helping the poor, letting the poor also buy some things, letting the poor even give. I noticed you had a section on that. Just all sorts of things to affirm them in their humanity. That's so right. That we don't come and say, well, I got all the answers and now I'll just tell you what you need. That is important for us to listen and to kind of work alongside and to be an encouragement to them. But Kelly, just before I let you go, let's again talk about how to use this book. You are, of course, the co-author of this book. And, of course, I might just mention Brian, who's the president of the Chalmers Center at Covenant College. So, first of all, let me also mention that if you want to get a great Christian education, going there to Lookout Mountain in Georgia is a good place to go so that you'll have a chance to learn from these men. But more importantly, talk about how people can use this book, because I know there are probably some people right now saying, okay, I need to, this fall, come up with something that we can study. This would really begin to connect up with some of the needs and hurts that people have that maybe they aren't even aware that they have. And as they start working through those 10 chapters, I think this would just be a great ministry in their lives, don't you think?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's the hope. And part of what we want to show is that this isn't just for poor. This is just the gospel. and caring for those who are materially poor relates to that. But we all have a poverty. And so it is basically talking about creation and the consequences of sin and what it means to live and some of the ways our culture and other things historically has distorted the good news for us, and so it's not quite as good as it should be. And so we actually think this is just, even if you don't do any poverty alleviation right now, working through this will help you better understand your faith and see that this is not just, some Christians should care about the poor. This is part of who we are as Jesus' people, as those who've been redeemed and set free to love and serve, not set free to consume and be self-indulgent.
Well, again, this is about 280-page book, and you can probably find it in your local bookstore, Moody Publishers. If not, of course, we have a way in which you can get it on our website, and that is at pointofview.net. Both in paperback and in Kindle. I would recommend it to really begin to help people understand what the gospel really is rather than a truncated view of the gospel. And at the same time, it'll really challenge you to go out there and make a difference in the world. And, of course, co-authored with an individual that wrote, of course, the book we've talked about before, When Helping Hurts. So, Kelly Kapic, it's been great to have you on the program. Let's do it again sometime soon.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
We're going to take a break, and in studio with us in the last half hour, Nicole C. Mullin will be with us. She and Kathy Lee Gifford have produced a song called The God Who Sees, but also there is an event taking place here very soon, as a matter of fact, tomorrow, that I think you're going to want to know about. So we're going to be talking about that with her. And, of course, if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, you can free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
In this final hour, as we've been talking about and promoting for about a day or two, Nicole C. Mullin in studio with us, an individual that you probably already know, but let me give you a little bit of background. Certainly recognized with 2 Grammy Award nominations, 9 Gospel Music Award Association Dove Awards, including 2 Female Vocalist of the Year Awards, Song of the Year, and on and on. We can go through a very long list. And matter of fact, we do have a link to her website. So if you find yourself saying, I'd like to know a little bit more, certainly we will do that. I want to talk about a couple of things. First of all, she's in town for the My Redeemer event. And then also a video that you can watch that she did with Kapic Githford on The God Who Sees, a single mom who can really speak to issues as well about broken relationships and really will be ministering to many of the women at this event. So, Nicole, thank you for joining us today in studio.
Oh, thank you so very much for having me. And that was such a nice, thing that you said earlier. Yeah, it was good.
It is. Well, it's all good. And I probably eliminated a lot. We have the entire bio there and a link to your website. But first of all, let's talk about this My Redeemer event. I just heard about that recently, and I'm going to see if I can get more of our women folk, if you will, out there to come and hear you. But talk about the idea behind this, because you really have got a heart for women, and talk about what you're going to be talking about there and what you're going to be singing about there.
Yes. The My Redeemer event this time is for women, like you said. And I have a heart for women who've gone through things. And I think really that's all of us. You know, I know what it's like to be married. I know what it's like to be divorced. I know what it's like to be a single. I know what it's like to be a single mom. And I've experienced, and I'm experiencing some of those, the status of simultaneously single and single mom right now.
Yes, I know.
And I've seen God step in, though, into every season of life and be faithful. And I've watched him buy back pain, heartache, shame, brokenness. And so this is what I want to share with other women. And so it's myself and some really good friends of mine who are going to come together to minister to women. And we're going to talk about finances. We're going to speak about relationships. We're going to talk about health. We're going to speak about these different aspects and how God walks with us and walks us through these different periods of life, and give practical application and spiritual impartation.
Let me just mention, when you go there, we have a link to myredeemerevent.com.
Yes.
And we also have it on our website, pointofview.net, so you don't have to remember all those words. It's all right there. Then in the upper right-hand corner, you can click on, for example, the speakers, and it is quite a cast of speakers as well that are going to be addressing a lot of different issues. And so you'll get a chance to learn about each one of the speakers. If you find yourself saying, well, might be nice just be in a hotel nearby rather than have to commute, we have that information there as well. And then, of course, we have all the emphasis upon this My Redeemer event. But speak to that a little bit more, because I think a lot of women might say, well, what will I gain out of this by having a chance to hear all these gifted speakers? I know I'm going to enjoy hearing you sing, but what else will I actually come away from? And is this something I can bring my daughter to? And, all sorts of questions that are obviously going through everybody's mind as they're hearing about this.
I love the questions, and I love to answer it. Absolutely. I think they'll walk away being refreshed, renewed, restored. That's our prayer. That's our hope. We've been bathing this in prayer for the past year, asking the Lord to show up and do in us what we cannot do in ourselves. We're going to be honest. So you'll hear honest conversation, in the midst of being in the presence of the Lord. I know sometimes, especially in Christendom, we feel as if we come to an event that is, where believers are there, that we have to kind of put on our Christian face. We have to wear our Christian mask.
Yeah.
But we're asking women to take them off this weekend, or just dare to hear and to see other women who are saying, I'll go first and I'll share my story, not to promote brokenness, but to promote the Redeemer who buys back our brokenness, to say, this is how he walks us through. And the same God who's done it for me, the same God who's doing it for me, wants to do it for you as well. And so it's for all women. Women from 12 and up, are welcomed. We're going to have a mother-daughter panel as well.
Perfect.
Yes. And so my mom will be there. She's one of our speakers. She's Chaplain Mary Jane Coleman. My daughter, Jasmine, will be there. We have other mothers and daughters on the panels as well. Chantel Cooley, her daughter, Brooke.
Right.
We have Andrea Malini, McClurkin Malini, and her daughter, Brittany. So we'll all be there. And I believe Andrea's mother-in-law, Joan will be there as well. So it'll be multi-generational. We'll talk about different things, different aspects of what it's like to be a daughter, to be a mother, to be a woman in this particular time. And so they'll be able to hear that. They'll be able to touch us and to see us, hopefully, like I said, when it's all said and done, they will have found the courage. Women will have found the courage to say, I want redemption in these areas of my life too. There's one thing to be redeemed with our salvation. We know that Christ has come to redeem us there. But he also, because of sanctification, he walks us through different departments of our lives too that we've kind of held back. What is it like to have a great relationship and have that redeemed? See God give us hope there. What is it like to be redeemed in our finances? What does that look like? What does it look like to have him redeem me in my spirit, soul, and my body and my health? And so these are things we want to talk about. We want to encourage, and we want to really present the Redeemer who is able to do it all.
My Redeemer event. And you did say something that I wanted to come back to, because I was going to ask about the masks, because I've been doing this broadcast, I think I figured out a third of a century, 33 years.
Oh, wow.
That's a long time. But I have had women call in and say, I've never told anybody, but I got an abortion 20 years ago, but I've never told anybody. Or, I was sexually abused 15 years ago, and I just didn't feel that I had a safe place where I could talk about that. And what you're talking about here is a place where you can be real, where you can be vulnerable, where you can be authentic, right?
Absolutely. And then we'll have people that will pray with them as well afterwards. Just if people need extra prayer, they need to speak to someone, we have people available for that too. We don't want to just open up a wound and then just leave it, because we believe that Jesus is the healer. But in order to be healed, we believe that you've got to be real first. And I love what happened over in John chapter 4. When Jesus, he had to go through Samaria, and he was speaking with the woman at the well, and he told her about herself, and she acknowledged that, okay, what you're saying is true, and I perceive that you're a prophet because you know my business. She didn't deny it. And then Jesus came back and said, the Father's looking for those who will worship him in spirit and in truth, the truth of who God is, but also the truth of who we are too. And so I believe when we're able, we find that courage to take off the mask. Then we find true worship. We find true redemption. And we find that God has no stones to throw. He's there to love us.
That is so good. Just before we take our first break, let's talk about some of the details. There is a 2-day event, which could include the concert finale. I don't see anybody who want to miss that, but again, I recognize that. There's a 2-day event without that. There are VIP tickets. There's the concert itself. So there are different levels at which people can participate. True?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it starts tomorrow night at 6:30 p.m. Christ for the Nations. I'm sure you'll say that. But
right now,
in one of their auditoriums, the Wayne Myers in the Frida Lindsay building.
Yes.
So we'll have that there, and then we'll start again at 8:30 on Saturday morning, and we'll go till around maybe 2:30 in the afternoon, and then we'll come back at around 6 for doors to open up for the concert that starts at 7 p.m. And the concert is for everyone, so that's for male and female, just so you know.
Well, that'd be good.
Yes.
And again, for people to say, okay, it's Christ for the Nations, we have the map there so people can find that and certainly participate there as well. It has a picture of all the different speakers so you can understand what that will be. And again, anything that you need, it's all available at our website, pointofview.net, or you can just click on that button that says My Redeemer Event, and that will give you everything you need to know. But also, when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about this music video, The God Who Sees. We started the program today by talking with one of our guests in studio about Israel, and that I thought would fit very well with some of the things that you and Kathy Lee Gifford have put together. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
So we're going to take a break, and let me just encourage you right now to find out a little bit more. And if you would like to know more about Nicole C. Mullin, we have a link to that website as well. It's NicoleCMullin.com.
Perfect.
You don't even have to remember how to spell it all. We've got it all right there. She, of course, has the information about that, but if you'd like to know more about her music, about her shows, about our store, which has all sorts of other resources, those are all available on our website, pointofview.net. And when we come back, I thought we'd talk about the God who sees for just a minute, because we certainly have focused our time and attention on the nation of Israel at a time when, interestingly enough, I have a booklet on anti-Semitism. You know, it's been something that we've really felt that we need to come back and recognize God's chosen people. We also have to recognize how God moves in society. So again, we have an opportunity to not only talk about the My Redeemer event, but also when we come back, we're going to talk about this music video, The God Who Sees. And if you find yourself saying, I'd like a little more information on some of the things we're talking about today, you can go to the website pointofview.net. And when you go there, you can also, if you want, to download the podcast in case you want to hear any of the interviews today, including the one we're doing with Nicole. Or you can go to the YouTube channel. Maybe you know somebody that needs to go to this event, and they're not listening to radio right now. You can take that, either the podcast or the YouTube video, and send it to them and say, this is something I think you might want to go to, or even better, you could go and buy them a ticket and say, you're going to come with me. Would
All
that
the
be
above.
worthwhile?
I love it.
So let's take a break. We've got a lot more to cover, and we'll talk about this music video, The God Who Sees, and I think we have a link there so you can watch that as well. But we need to take a break, and we'll be back right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Such a privilege to have in studio with us for a few more minutes, Nicole C. Mullin. And first of all, let me just mention that if you have not seen this music video, The God Who Sees, just fascinating, and it is a song that we will talk about, but you actually partnered with Kathy Lee Gifford. How did that come about?
Wow. Well, a friend of ours, Angie Clausen, she put us together for a writing session, and I hadn't really co-written a whole lot, and so it was like, okay, let's try and do this. And Kathy and I, we met the same day we wrote, and we were actually writing for Danny Goki, and so we started writing this song here, and before I knew it, a few weeks later, we went into the studio, or actually maybe a month or so, to do the demo for it. And Kathy suggested that I consider it as an artist, not just as a songwriter. And so after going back and forth a couple of times, I said, nah, not me, nah. She said, honey, you can do this. So I got into the booth, and she said, well, for the time being, just speak from your heart on the narration, and I'll go back and I'll, rewrite the script later on. And so I got in there and closed my eyes and asked the Lord to speak. And I began to just say what came from my heart, because I'm a Bible nerd, just as Kathy is. And I love the scriptures. I love the Old Testament as well as the New. And I began to do the narration in between the singing. And then when I would finish speaking, I would sing, and then I'd speak and sing. And when it was over, I was so sure that Kathy, if you know Kathy Lee Gifford, I thought she was going to say, honey, that wasn't good at all. And so we're going to do that again. And, I'm going to rewrite it. And instead, she had her hands up and she was crying. And she said, it's the Lord. Yeah. And so from there, we just edited, a few words here and there. And she decided that day that we were going to go to Israel, and she was going to shoot a film on it. And so she did just that. She directed a film in the Holy Land for the God Who Sees. And we have never been more thrilled, honestly, with the results. And so grateful as to what the Lord has done with it and what he's doing with it. And we call it the gospel in 11 minutes.
Yeah, I want to get to that because it's 11 minutes. So first of all, some people that have trouble with attention deficit can actually focus. But in 11 minutes, you really do share the gospel. And it's really, you're on the scene. Yeah, I mean, it is fascinating because I ask you off air, but I'll ask you on air, a couple of times it looked like it may have been kind of hot, but some days it was kind of cold, depending on where you were. But you learned a little bit more about what it's like to be an actress in that.
Yes.
Talk about that, if you might.
Yes, and that was different for me because, I'd, of course, been a singer for forever. I've been writing songs since the age of 12. And when we were writing this particular song, Kathy kept saying, I see more in you. I see that God, can expand you into being an actress as well, and to do, voiceovers and all of this. And I was thinking, well, I don't know. We'll see. And she's like, I'm telling you, honey, when we get out there in Israel, you're going to become an actress. And so when we were on the set, all of a sudden, it was as if the Lord gave me the courage, and he gave me the ability to convey the story at hand. And I loved every moment of it. I really did. And like you said, was it? You asked if it was hot.
Up there in the sand.
Yes, it was
like
hot in the sand. Yeah. In the garden, it was cold.
Yeah.
It was very windy on certain days. We were in the cave, and it was very we had a lot of bees, so it's very bee. Yeah. So there was a lot of different climates and just different surroundings, elements. But God was faithful through it all, even in the ring of fire. That we had. And I know I'm giving it all away, but you've got to see it.
Yeah.
But the Lord showed up in
Powerful.
every aspect, in every scene, and he made himself glorified. And so I pray that when people see it, that they will also gain the knowledge and the encouragement that God sees them as well.
Well, again, it's a great video, and we might talk about how people can use that because, first of all, we live in this YouTube video world. So lots of times people see a link to YouTube and they'll click on it, and if they can just give themselves a few seconds, they'll get hooked and they'll watch it to the end.
Yes.
And so it's a great opportunity to encourage fellow believers. But I do believe that the way you've put it together, it's really kind of evangelistic too, isn't it?
It is. And we've had a lot of people, a lot of non-believers tell us how God has used it to just let them know that he sees them and that he cares for them. And that was something that wasn't, it wasn't made clear to them prior to, So people have been using it as an evangelical tool, to pull people in and to just say, hey, taste and see that God is good. Because he is, and he does love them. And we have to remind people all the time that there are no perfect people in the Bible except for Christ.
Yes.
All the rest were messed up just like us. And that's who Christ came to redeem.
Yes.
And so that's who he sees, and that's who he encourages.
That's a theme that runs again through, and somebody just joined us. We've been talking earlier about the Redeemer event, which is certainly a very significant part. But just before we run out of time, I wanted to also talk about your website, NicoleCMullin.com, because some people might say, well, I'd like to know more about you, or I'd like to know more about your music, or I'd like to find out where you're going to be singing next. Or, of course, if also they want to know about this event, all they have to do is click on this particular button right below it called My Redeemer Event. But what can they find if they go to your website, which again is NicoleCMullin.com?
They can find a lot about me. They can learn a lot about what I do, where I'm going, where I've been. Of course, they can buy some swag.
Yeah.
They'll be encouraged. They'll find links to different places. They'll be able to connect with me on social media. So if they're into Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, we have the buttons there for them to click as well. And so it's kind of like coming into my home. It's my virtual media home.
Well, I just mentioned, too, that we broadcast in a lot of different states. You're going to be in Charlotte, for example, and, of course, you're in Dallas right now, and just all sorts of different places. And, of course, you can find out more about her and certainly find out more about this event. But one last time, just again, the My Redeemer event. Tomorrow night it begins, and if you want to know more, click on myredeemerevent.com. You can click on the picture of the speakers and find out each one of those. You can register. There's contact, but talk about one more time what is available when they land on that website.
Yes, they can. They will also be able to get to the My Redeemer event. And I wanted to say this to Kerby. One of the things about the My Redeemer event, I believe, that makes it a little bit different than some of the other events that I've been a part of, and I love women's conferences, but I intentionally did not invite all of my famous friends to be speakers on purpose.
Yeah.
The speakers that I asked to be a part of this, they're highly successful in their areas. They're highly successful in the area of finances, in health, in their business, in their marriages. And so I asked them because I wanted the other people, the other women, to see that you don't have to have a huge platform to be successful. You don't have to be famous for God to use you. God can use everyday heroes and sheroes to do his work and to prosper. And so these are my friends that are going to be joining me for the next couple of days to encourage other ordinary, extraordinary sheroes, that they can do the exact same thing that God has allowed my friends to be able to do. And so there's a method to that madness. So if you're saying, I don't know these people, trust me, you will by the end of the weekend, and you'll love them as much as I do.
That's a good thing, too, because you see the speakers say, well, I don't know who they are, but trust Nicole because she has picked them out just for you.
Yes.
And so, again, we have that. And again, we have a link to NicoleCMullin.com as well as, of course, the My Redeemer event. And it's all available at our website, pointofview.net, so you don't have to remember all those names and links because we have them all right there. So, Nicole, I appreciate you coming by, and I wish you well at the conference. Those of us that are men are saying, I wish we could go.
Come to the concert.
We'll send our women and certainly encourage that as well. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Kerby.
Just before we run out of time, let me mention that if you find yourself saying, I'd like to know a little bit more, we've talked with a lot of different guests today, 4 different guests in 3 hours. That kept me busy today. And, of course, we have our weekend edition tomorrow. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford will be with us. We'll be talking about religious liberty issues, some real victories, one that took place in the Supreme Court, now even having an impact in places like Pennsylvania. So we'll talk about that. And, of course, the president's given us a few things to say. And, of course, the economy has given us a few things to say. So we'll have a lot to cover tomorrow here on Point of View. So if you'd like to know a little bit more, all available at our website, pointofview.net. And one last time, let me encourage you maybe to download that podcast or that YouTube channel, especially the interview with Nicole. Send it to someone else, maybe even at this late hour. There might be a few women that say, I didn't know about this. I think I'll go. And you could invite them. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really